Legal Line, the half-hour informational show where we discuss topics of legal interest and allow you to call in. During the show, you'll be flashing the phone number for you to call, and we do encourage you to call. It's 617-973-4848, and that'll be flashing the screen several times. This afternoon's show is sponsored by the Mass Association of Women Lawyers. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Healy, and my guest and I today will be concentrating on the subject of the Asian American community and their access to and use of the legal system and some special problems that might create for them. My guest today to discuss this is Attorney Ingrid Schroffner. Ingrid is a senior associate with the law firm of Burns & Levinson here in Boston, and she's also on the executive board of the Asian American Lawyers Association of Massachusetts. Have I got that right, Ingrid?
That's right.
And we'll say ALAM for short, is that right?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us exactly what ALAM is? It's a statewide bar association, is that right?
That's right. We're actually part of a national organization called NAPABA. I'm just going to use the acronym. You can probably tell what it means. The National Association of Lawyers, Asian American and Pacific Lawyers. And our mission really is to further the legal profession and Asian American access to and practice in the legal profession in conjunction with working with civic organizations in various communities. In particular for ALAM, it's working with civic associations and communities in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. Yes, and the census actually recently just showed that the minority population in Massachusetts is largely constituted of Asian Americans, and it's the fastest growing minority population in Massachusetts.
So you're already the largest here in Massachusetts.
That's right, and the largest growing population.
I think any of us, even those of us who don't have that much contact with the Asian American community, are aware of at least certain groups growing very largely. But that's a big group, isn't it, the Asian Americans? You're encompassing more than what we might think of as Chinese or Japanese.
Yes, yes. Actually, the word or the term Asian American is kind of it's an umbrella term. It encompasses a large group of minorities. I should say ethnicities. In Massachusetts, we have, just to mention a few, Cambodians, Koreans, Japanese, Vietnamese, Laotian, any number of ethnicities.
Even Indian.
That's right, Indian is also.
Because everybody knows there's a lot more Indian Americans here.
That's
lately.
right.
We can see them. Polynesian groups.
That's right.
So you've got a broad compass there of people under your umbrella.
Absolutely.
About how many attorneys have you got that are in your organization at this point?
I think at this point we have over 100 Asian lawyers and professors and judges who are part of this organization. It's been incorporated since 1984, and we recently celebrated our 20th anniversary.
Very good. But with such a large growing population, I'm sure you have a lot to do. Is it concentrated largely on education or other types of outreach, or what kind of services are you interested in providing?
Well, we try to provide services for Asian American litigants, which entail sort of, I guess, community workshops that the Asian lawyers sponsor. We had one recently in Lowell for the Cambodian residents there in the Cambodian community. These are run by Flora Chan of ALAM. We have one upcoming in July at the Vietnamese Civic Association. It's our third year running doing that program. We've done some in Boston's Chinatown, and we have that sort of outreach for Asian Americans in the community who might have certain issues, legal issues, that need to be addressed, and just to give them an awareness of the resources that are there to address those issues. On the other side of things, we also do programs for lawyers in general, because we're not just Asian Americans, we're Asian American lawyers, and we're part of the greater legal community of Massachusetts. To that end, I did a program jointly with the Boston Bar Association in family law, which is, I think, where a lot of cultural differences really come to the fore when you're talking about definitions of family and roles in families and what have you.
Well, one of the things that before we came on today, you had given me some materials, and I indicated to you that what interested me was I could have anticipated that you'd be reaching out to the Asian American community and where they might get access or how they might locate a lawyer. But you had a great deal that was addressed to the rest of us who aren't Asian on what we might do to help your community, and that was very interesting. And that's sort of what you're talking about with the Boston Bar Group here.
That's right.
And what are the particular, you know, obviously every immigrant group is going to have some issues, language and stuff, but you were indicating that there were some special issues perhaps with Asian Americans, and maybe you could just outline some of that for us. That's sort of interesting.
Sure, that's what those programs I was just mentioning addressed. There was one in 2003, jointly with the Boston Bar, and one recently this past March in 2005. And what we addressed is really about how we can best be advocates as lawyers for people who are of different ethnicities, who might have different ways of viewing words that we see in English and take for granted, and which have legal definitions. There might be communication problems which are far beyond problems of actual language barriers. Mm-hmm. For example, there might be methods of communication such as one's affect or demeanor. In some Asian cultures, and I'll just speak of Japanese because I'm of Japanese ancestry, it's considered rude to look a person in the eye when speaking. Of course, one might know as a lawyer, if you don't answer a question by looking, say, a judge or an examiner in the eye, it looks as if a person is being shifty, or it could look as if a person is being shifty and trying to avoid or evade the question. Another concern might be that in the Japanese culture, a person might just say yes to agree to the fact that a person has said a certain thing, but not actually agree to the statement because it's considered rude, really, to say no.
I see. Now, one other thing I had mentioned to you, and you sort of agreed with me, was I said, when I looked at your materials, I realized that I don't see that many Asian Americans in the court, either as lawyers, except for there's some young lawyers coming along like yourself, but that many using the court as litigants sometimes, as opposed to maybe like the Hispanic groups, which obviously have a language barrier, but I still see them there. And that, in fact, may indicate a cultural difference in their perception of and desire to use the court system. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. Actually, one of my panelists in this past program we had in March, Dr. Tai, he talked about the Pacific means of dispute resolution, is what he called it, in which I guess an Asian mindset believes that it's kind of undignified to go and seek help from the courts because it's a public forum and people should be able to resolve their differences, especially when dealing with personal and family matters, without going to the public and without airing grievances and dirty laundry in the public. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of deemed unseemly to go and seek counsel and to parade around in the courtroom with a person's problems or woes or claimed needs. One's claim of being needy is also sometimes looked down upon. And this is just a conception. It's a cultural difference, maybe.
Sure. But that must make it a little difficult sometimes, for instance, getting them to know that they should look for legal aid or something like that if they need some sort of help, or a lawyer to help them if they're charged with a crime, or even if they're wondering if somebody else has committed a crime against them.
Yes, and that's the purpose of those community outreach programs that we have and which Alum sponsors. The programs for the greater legal community are also somewhat engendered by the fact that there aren't, as you point out, and I think aptly, that many Asian American litigators in Massachusetts. I've noticed, for one, that if I'm sitting in a Superior Court 2 o'clock call, I may be still one of very few female lawyers, and also probably the only Asian American in the room.
I would think that's usually the case.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, and for that reason, even more so, I think these programs, especially the joint ones with the Boston Bar, to explain cultural differences and to educate lawyers to look for these cultural differences and to be aware that there could be problems of communication beyond language when they represent an Asian American client. They're very important because you don't have maybe Asian American litigators, 1-for-1 for every Asian American litigant.
Well, yes, that's the other thing we talked about. I said to you at one point that obviously for a lot of Asian Americans, the easiest thing would be to locate an Asian American attorney. But that might not be possible, or might not be possible for somebody that speaks their particular language. So the rest of us may have to become more familiar with these differences. I'm being indicated that we do have a call. Caller, you're on legal line.
Hello, I'm Doris, and I'm a Cambodian person, but I have a need for an attorney. I wondered if Attorney Schroffner would happen to know what I could do to be able to get some attorney that would understand about what I need.
Hi Doris, how are you? We have our contact information at our website. Do you have access to the internet?
Not that much.
Okay, well, I am in the Red Book at Burns and Levinson. I have a phone number.
Could I call you at your office and you could give me more information?
Absolutely. I might not be able to help you personally, but I can refer you to some resources. In fact, I had a colleague of mine from the Family Law Association recently call me just last week to get a referral, and I brought in Flora Chan to let him know about some resources. It depends, you know, on what the unique problem or what the legal need is.
I would feel comfortable with an Asian attorney.
And is there a phone number where they can access the actual Asian American Law Association, or is it more contacting one of you on the board?
It's more contacting one of us on the board, and you know, we're all attorneys in Massachusetts. All of our contact information is on our website, but if you don't have access to the website, you know, you can reach me at Burns and Levinson. The number is 617-345-3000.
Oh, that's good. And I could look that up anyway.
And for anybody looking to actually reach you on your website who does have access to the internet, that's at AALAM?
Oh yes, www.aalam.org.
And you were also indicating to me beforehand, Ingrid, that perhaps if they called any of the Mass Bar or Boston Bar Associations and indicating they were looking for somebody who spoke a particular language or had some sort of an Asian attorney, that they could perhaps put them in touch with you or a member of their board?
That's true. I've also gotten some calls, referrals from GBLS, the Greater Boston Legal Services, and the Boston Bar Association, the Lawyers Referral Service, based on those programs with ALAM and the and the Bar Association with respect to the greater legal community.
Now also, is your information available? You've mentioned you work with some of the community groups. If they went, for instance, if somebody was Vietnamese, went to their local group that deals with Vietnamese issues, they might be able to put them in touch with your organization or something like that?
Absolutely. The Vietnamese Civic Association, I believe they're located in Dorchester. They have information about resources and contacts with ALAM as well.
Okay. Now, getting back to, we're talking about a lot that the Asian community, your outreach to them, but we were talking about what you do for the rest of us who may be having more and more Asian clients over time. If one of us has, for instance, an Asian client contact us, and we're concerned about some of the language barriers or cultural issues, I mean, where can we look for help from your organization or elsewhere?
Well, you know, any one of our board members are always, you know, happy to consult. But beyond that, I suppose there could be a trust issue when you have a Caucasian person representing an Asian American litigant. I believe that was actually raised by Doris, one of the caller we just had. But beyond that, in order to get your client or have your client trust you, I think there are some things you can do to show that you are considering culture and that you are sensitive to those cultural needs that a litigant may have, who may or may not tell you whether or not you are actually hearing them, or may or may not tell you certain information that you need to address their legal problems if they don't trust you fully.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the sort of things that you can do to build that sort of trust?
To build that sort of trust, you can sort of you can ask questions a certain ways that they're not leading. I think sometimes as attorneys, you know, we're short on time and we think, okay, here are the legal elements. I need to get X, Y, and Z and get that from my client. But in a situation where you have somebody who has a different culture and perhaps also a different language as a first language, you have to be more careful. I think maybe asking a person questions not using legal language, but asking in a way that causes a person to answer with realistic facts, to answer a question maybe 3 or 4 ways, could actually get you what you need so that you can represent the person properly. Because really, as advocates, what we're about is communication. And if we don't communicate with the client, how can the client trust us, and how can we communicate to the court what the client wants?
Right. Because some of that is just good communication things between people anyway. Being
That's
very
right. We're all
careful,
people.
Being aware of that there may be cultural differences.
That's
or
right.
the necessity of. Now, language, of course, you've indicated there are bigger problems than just language, but that is a big problem. You're dealing with, I mean, there must be in dozens of languages that can come from your group. I know just getting interpreters in the court system when you're dealing with the more well-known European languages can be difficult. That must be a significant difficulty with your group.
Yes, and that's why we've got these community organizations that we work with, so that we can talk to people who aren't necessarily lawyers, but who know people who can be translators, who are court-certified interpreters, who know people who can become court-certified interpreters, so we can aid